Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Harguess.
Hey folks, let's talk about marijuana, the devil's lettuce. This topic is so interesting to me, even today with all we know about its health benefits. I was talking with my buddy William one night about this, and the longer the conversation went, I kept thinking this should be an episode on the Bad Roman Podcast. Today, William, Scott, Aaron, and Jim join me to discuss this very topic.
Let's go. Yeah. Left, right, left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right, right. We'd rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live what he said.
Scott, let's start with you. How are you doing, my friend? You're not new to the Bad Roman Podcast, and I'm happy to have you back on today.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I'm just enjoying the summer as much as I can and working away and, yeah, just everyday life.
Good. We haven't got to talk in a little bit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with marijuana and how you kind of got into it, and then we'll go from there and we'll go to William and talk with him.
I guess I first have to go back to my childhood. This just popped in my head, but like my first experiences with marijuana were not very good. My mother and my stepdad at the time, like that's about all they did when I was around about 5 years old. And my stepdad thought it would be like a funny thing to get me and my brother high and kind of laugh at us. So I had some negativity towards marijuana as a child, but then I hit high school and that all changed. And then through high school, I smoked. And then around the age of 21, I gave my life to Christ and I gave up everything. And then marijuana came back into my life around the age of 35. And during that time span, I was really like, oh, weed just makes people lazy, because all it did was make me lazy. I kind of just used that. And then a friend of mine had asked me, he's like, well, do you know people who smoke weed that are like more successful and more productive than you are in life? And I'm like, actually, I do. And so it kind of started the ball rolling towards looking at it a little bit more closely. And it was also during the economic crash of 2008. And that same friend was telling me that, hey, like it's medically legal right now. And like to supplement our income, we could actually grow this and receive donations for it, because you can't sell it. That would be illegal. But if somebody gave you a donation, that was legitimate. And so that is what started me to look at it again. And then once I started watching some documentaries, I believe they were on Netflix, one of them, I think you're going to mention later, it really started like making me think, what else is the government lying about? And that kind of also started my move back to anarchism.
Was marijuana and that you were being lied to about it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that I was being lied to. Yeah. And it was just more of like, what? And then from there, I started watching a ton of documentaries about other subjects, and we're like, oh, my initial thought as a kid that the government was not straight up honest is coming back to remind me again. And I'll just say life is using marijuana to teach me that lesson.
All right, William, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're new to the show, and then tell us a little bit about your experience with marijuana.
So I'm 40 years old, husband and father. I am a Christian. I walk with the Lord. I'm not perfect. So first time I was introduced to a functional use of marijuana was, I believe it was about 31 or 32. I did not grow up around it. I was raised in church. I was always told it was evil, the devil's lettuce, no redeeming quality whatsoever. And of course, weed makes you lazy, weed makes you stupid. The problem is that I'd been dealing with pretty terrible anxiety since I was a child, different life events, abuse, just a lot of factors going on there. Yeah, it was a perfect storm. And then started dealing with melancholic depression. Didn't even know what it was when I was 14 years old. I mean, it was just months of not being able to see the sunshine, emotionally speaking and mentally speaking. And, I struggled through all that, trying the best I could. I got rid of all my guns. That's how bad it was. And I divorced, remarried. I'm 31. I'm working as an EMT. I'm sitting in my living room with some friends we had coming down from Arkansas. And and he brought weed. He actually smuggled it in a peanut butter jar, had it stuffed in a sandwich bag and everything. And I lit it for the first time, and I was having about a 6-month period of a melancholic depression. And it was hard for me to come out, man. I was drinking like crazy. I would start my time off when I got home with 9 shots of vodka and a 32-ounce glass, top it off with OJ, and chug it and sit on my couch and cry. Okay. Or, just anything to deal with what I was dealing with. And man, I smoked, and all of a sudden it lifted. And I got up and I cleaned my kitchen. It didn't make me want to go hurt anybody or hit my wife or do anything sexually immoral. I was with it. I wasn't pulled one side or the other. It just allowed me to be. And that started my journey with that.
Yeah, see, I remember back in the day when I was younger, we did a lot of things that we shouldn't have been doing. But I don't think marijuana was one of the bad things we were doing. Because to me, it was just a plant at the time. Well, I was young. And then the older I got, then I was like, oh, maybe this stuff is bad and we shouldn't be participating. And I was one of those in Arkansas that voted against the medical marijuana. But then, it wasn't long after that. I was like, that's ridiculous. This is stupid. It's a plant. Why am I? But I always felt like it made me lazy too. We were mixing it with a lot of alcohol. So we were smoking a lot of weed and drinking a lot of alcohol in our 20s. And then it was just, maybe that's what was making me lazy. Now, back then when we would smoke some pot, I was the type of person, if you just gave me a bag of Cheetos and the History Channel, I was good for the rest of the night. And I didn't want to do anything else. And then once I started coming down, I just wanted to go to sleep. But I've noticed now, and I've talked to my brother, he says he can get up. You said you got up and clean the kitchen. He says he can get up and clean the entire house on the stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe it just depends on how you're using it. If you want to use it to relax, if you want to use it to I don't know. But I think it affects every person differently. But I think it affects each person differently depending on what's going on with that person at the time too. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And you keep on saying lazy. And is it laziness, or is it basically getting your mind and body connected in such a way to where they were able to communicate and say, you know what, you need to refocus your priorities. We're going to shut you down and force you to deal with some of this stuff that you've been avoiding so you can heal and speed up and accomplish things. Sometimes I think we just need a redirect. And what this is, man, to me, it's like control delete on just the hellacious mess that's going on in your mind. Now, hey, God is my help. Okay. I don't doubt that. I don't deny that, but I believe that God created this for a reason. There's a reason why we have the cannabinoid system in our bodies, and they're teaching it in nursing school now. There is a connection there. And I can't understand why people don't understand that a God who created us in an intelligent way, okay, in our bodies to react to certain things in his creation, why all of a sudden is verboten in everything? It just doesn't make sense to me. I came from a medical background. I was an EMT for 5 years. I got out of nursing school. I've always had a heart to help people. And the thing is that I've been able to help people the way I need to be able to help people because I need help first myself. And this has allowed me to do that. This has allowed me to heal. It's been able to reconcile relationships with my wife, with my daughter, and also with my creator, I believe, because I'm able to see him for who he is, because I'm able to shut out all the noises that distract me, all the things that try to get my attention and speak lies. And that's where I'm coming from with this, And
I appreciate what you just said, because I had some friends stop through over the last night, stayed the night with me, and we were talking about this a little bit. And I told one of them, I said, I said, if I use like a Delta 8 or something, I said it slows me down, but it doesn't like slow me down to where I don't want to do anything. Like I was busy doing stuff, but it slows my mind down. And she goes, are you the type of person where your mind is constantly racing? I said, yes. And I said, you'll catch me at work sometimes. I'm by myself a lot when I'm at work, and it looks like maybe I am talking to myself, but I've got a lot of stuff going on in my brain at once. And maybe I'm talking out loud to myself, but I'm not actually answering any of my questions. They say that's when you're actually crazy, I guess. But if I'm talking out loud, it's because I've had people come up to me, are you talking to yourself? I was like, yeah, maybe, but I didn't think anybody was watching,
Yes, same here.
But that's just because my mind is just constantly running about thinking about things. And that just kind of just slows me down a little bit to where I'm just like, I can relax. It takes the edge off. It takes the edge off. Like with alcohol and stuff, they say that takes the edge off. I don't believe so anymore. I think that adds to the edge.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, marijuana or hemp does not add to the edge. I think it takes the edge off and you're able to kind of just relax. And I think that's a good thing. And we'll get into this during as the show goes on. But I think that we'll find that people aren't necessarily using it just to get high. There's a multitude of reasons why people take part in marijuana, and it's not just to get high. And we're going to have Christians that when they listen to this that may not be on board are going to say things like, well, you shouldn't alter your mind that way. And I want to get into that as the show goes on as well. But I don't see it as a bad thing anymore. I used to. Now, let's move on to Jim, who is on the show for the first time. He can tell us a little bit about himself and his experience with marijuana.
Yeah, so I grew up in a really small town, really rural area in the northern part of the lower peninsula of Michigan, just in the middle of the woods. The town where the post office was had one blinking light, lots of state land. And a lot of people, I realized, moved up there. There's a good portion of people moved up there because they didn't like the government. They wanted to just, have their own space and be left alone. And when I was a kid, I didn't really, when I was a boy in the 80s, I didn't really know anything about marijuana. I remember seeing a cartoon once when I was like 8 where, it was during the whole drug war with Nancy Reagan and whatever, where they had like Bugs Bunny on there and some kid went to take a hit from a joint in an alley. And Bugs Bunny's like, hey, before you do that, this is your future if you take the hit of that joint. And he was like literally dying of heroin overdose in the sewer. And so, that was my impression at the time when I was a kid. I didn't know any better. They were doing DARE and everything back then. And the other thing that I noticed when looking back was I remember I was staying at this house and I was told not to go upstairs. And at one point, I ended up upstairs anyway. And there was this plant in front of this big window. I didn't even pay any attention to the plant. There was this jug of Miracle Grow right next to it. and I remember asking the adults why they left the Kool-Aid out and if I could have some. So that was basically, when it started. But then I remember when I realized at some point when I was like in 5th or 6th grade that there was this adult that I knew that I cared about who used marijuana, and I had to ask my mom about it, and I was terrified because of that whole Bugs Bunny cartoon. Then I realized a few years later, like 1 in 3 adults is doing this, and they just never talk about it. And then I remember, actually, when I was a teenager, it was easier to get marijuana than it was to get alcohol for me because I didn't know a lot of older kids, so they wouldn't like be able to buy beer for me or whatever. But the kids my age, because it was illegal, the dealers didn't care how old you were. So, and then, I didn't do it a whole lot, but I remember when I got my first real job, I had a mentor, and then I went off to college. And then when I came back, I was hanging out with him, and he had all of a sudden discovered marijuana. He was like 30 years old. And he was like, do you smoke pot? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, wow, it's like a secret society, isn't it? And the other thing that I noticed too was when I was a kid, there was all these helicopters flying around my town. And, part of that probably was the Michigan militia. They were keeping an eye on them. But also people grew marijuana on state land. And so they were always looking for plants, and it's part of the big drug war. And the funny thing was that, there would be dry spells where people couldn't get marijuana. And when they did, it was this terrible Mexican brown brick commercial weed, except for during harvest season. And then the quality of the marijuana got like 5 times better. So that was really, kind of my experience was just, that, I don't know, it was funny because there was a lot of people you'd hear, at a certain point, even though like my mom was always one of those people who never got drunk, but she'd actually have one small glass of wine every day. So there wasn't really a lot of I wasn't exposed to a lot of that. But then I actually ended up having a drinking problem. And when I was in my early 20s, I experimented with a bunch of things, but the only thing that really got me was alcohol. And it was, there's like this whole problem that I had where it was like I would be depressed because I drank, and I drink because I was depressed. And then too, if I had a small amount of alcohol, there'd be like a switch that would flip in my head, even if I hadn't drank in months, where I had to get messed up one last time, like. But I never really had that problem with cannabis. And then, one of the things when I quit alcohol was I wanted to make sure that I didn't use cannabis to get over alcohol, because I personally had this intuition that if I substituted it, if I didn't go through, the difficulties of quitting alcohol, that I would start to associate my addiction with alcohol with cannabis. And I've never, the big thing was alcohol made my life unmanageable. I was miserable. I'm really surprised that I was able to keep a job, but, it was just barely. Like you go to work and people would smell alcohol on you, even though you hadn't drank since the night before. But, I never really had that issue. Like I quit for periods of time. I might quit right now because I'm not sure about a job. I know I talked to you about maybe quitting for a job if I move to Tennessee, and one of the things you were just talking to William about, which is interesting to me, is, I feel like some people, they really do that takes the edge off. Like my mom, when she has a glass of wine, it takes the edge off. Right. And for me, it's the same thing with cannabis. It's just, I just have to make sure that I don't get, too used to having it. Like I was smoking when I was working at a job that they didn't have a problem with it here in Michigan, because it is technically legal here, but it's weird the way it works with jobs. But I'll smoke it before I wash dishes, and then I stop using it, and then I go to wash dishes. I'm like, man, I got to do this sober. But yeah, so that's just kind of the rundown with me. And
yeah, it's strange to me that at this point in time, and we talked about this a little, or you were talking about a little bit before we started recording, they ought to be able to do a test where they can tell if you're actually high at that moment. Because if people are using marijuana and then they go to work and they can lose their job over a piss test or something because of it, but they might not even be high. Maybe they just smoked some marijuana on the weekend and they're back to work on Monday. I think it's silly. I think the whole thing is silly at this point. I don't get it.
Or the testing, they do have that here in Washington State for, like, if a police officer thinks you're high on weed while driving, it tests you for the amount that, like, causes you to get high within your blood. But, like, it doesn't just say, okay, this guy has a marijuana in the system. So that can last, months, depending on your, I think it's your BMI, body mass index, I think is, how long it can stay in your system. But anyways.
And that's why I wanted to have the conversation, because I don't know many other Christian podcasts that talk about this, and if they do, I don't know if they're going to get into it like we're going to get into it today, because I think we all have a different perspective of what's going on with this compared to what I was used to growing up in the church, that it was the devil's lettuce, and it was the thing that could lead to so many other bad things in your life. And when you just get right down to it, it's just a dang plant. That's all it is. And as far as I know, God gave us all the plants, so we'll see. I mean, I just don't think it's as big a deal as a lot of people want to make it out to be. And I think a lot of people are actually waking up to it. We're seeing it across the board. It seems like, living in Tennessee, they haven't quite got on board with any of it. They just shot down a law. They were trying to pass medical marijuana in Tennessee, and Tennessee legislator shot it down. So let's go ahead and get Aaron introduced on here, and then we will go back to Scott. Aaron, this is your first time on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with marijuana?
All right. I really didn't have anything to do with it growing up. I was a good church kid, and my mom was the church choir director, and I was in the youth group and then a youth leader, and it literally just really never came up. And in my adult life, it didn't really come up either until I injured my back at a job, and I pretty much did everything that the doctors can do for somebody that injures their back. I had, the injections to start, and I was on all the drugs for the entire period, but injections and physical therapy and multiple kinds of surgery to fix my back. And, after, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, they decided that surgeries weren't going to fix it anymore. They're just going to keep writing pain pills for me. And when a doctor does that, and they've kind of resigned that you're going to be on it the rest of your life, they add, medicines for your stomach because the pain pills tear up your stomach, and they give you antidepressants because you're in constant pain. So of course you're depressed about that. And they layer it on. I was on like 12 different pills a day for a decade for a sore back. It was right around, I want to say 2001. I mean, I was home on all this pharmaceutical medication. Most of my day consisted of watching like the Learning Channel and History Channel and stuff like that on TV. You can't really move around much when you're in pain. But I think it was maybe National Geographic. I don't remember which channel it was at the time, but they were doing this whole thing about weed. They had like a Weed Wars show where they were showing like, I think it was, the different guys out in California that were competing about it in the black market. And there was all kinds of shows, but there was one in particular where there was a guy in California, I think his name was Nathaniel Hawthorne, and he was giving CBD to pediatric epilepsy patients. And I was watching it, and I might break down in tears again now, but I was just like, wait, there's a plant that can do this? Like, if it's safe enough that he's giving it to a kid, it must be safe enough for me to try. I'm an adult that's already tried all these pharmaceuticals. So I jokingly on Facebook, I went on and I posted, hey, does anybody have any weed? And this was, I don't even know if medical was in Michigan yet, but funny enough, one of my old church friends messaged me privately and said, were you serious, sir? Do you need some weed? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I need weed. And she drove over to my house and gave me a little baggie. And for the first time in like 12 years, I laid on my couch in absolutely no pain. And I kind of just like floated there. I mean, it was an amazing experience. My first time at the age of like, I don't know, 32, 38, something like that. And yeah, I mean, almost instantly, like the next day, I think I went on the website and figured out how to get my medical card and, tried to find a caregiver. But I just went full force into it. And I had a disability settlement, and I had a dispensary that I knew I could get medicine at. And so every month I would just take my disability settlement down there and buy my pain medicine. And it was wonderful. And then a couple years into that, my disability settlement payments ended. And there really isn't any option when you aren't working to have that kind of medicine on a daily basis unless you do it yourself. So around 2013, I think, I started growing my own in my backyard. And thankfully I was pain-free enough at that point that I could do that. So yeah, that's kind of where it goes. And now at this point, I have some patients of my own, and in my own family and outside of my family. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I needed a high dose for medical reasons. And at the time, and I don't even know what the market is like right now, but at the time you couldn't buy anything that was like really potent. Like when I was still having to buy my medicine, there were different extracts coming out that were made with solvents. They were really sketchy. The people making them were kind of sketchy, and the way they were made was a little sketchy. And I got turned on to, I was already doing organic stuff for my own health in my diet. And so I got turned on to this process called bubble hash making, where you can make these high potency extracts, and it's a mechanical process. There's no chemicals involved. You use ice water, and it breaks the trichomes off the plant, and they sink. It's as simple as that. So that's what I've done since about 2013. I've grown all my own medicine and taken on some patients, and yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Now, are you that's fantastic. Are you off of all the pharmaceutical drugs now since you started that, or are you still having to take any of those?
Yeah, that was almost an immediate thing. that the ending of my pharmaceutical story was that while I was on all these drugs, I had to go see my doctor every month because they have to do that to prescribe them to you. And he finally just said, I can't keep, these are legitimately tearing up your stomach and stuff. So you need to go to this class of mine to find out about an implanted morphine pump.
Good grief.
And we're going to implant that in your body, and it'll just give you regular doses. I can control it with my cell phone when you come in every month, and we can refill it. And man, I went to one appointment and I was like, there is no way you are putting a pump in me. And I had already had my little puff from my church friend at that point. And I was just like, there is no way I'm doing this. And he was just, he didn't have to end it, but he kind of said, all right, well, if you don't want to do that, there's nothing else I can really do for you.
They just want to pump more drugs in you.
Yeah. At the time I told him I wanted off the drugs. And so he made me detox from them in probably about the nastiest way possible that a doctor could do. Made me go through the withdrawal for a whole weekend before giving me the drugs that stopped the withdrawal. So yeah, that was a pretty hellish experience. But then I was off of them and I had cannabis and I was still on a couple of them and the antidepressants and stuff like that. And I just kind of over the next year or two, I weaned myself off everything because I had access to, a pretty good supply of cannabis with my disability funds. And yeah, I weaned off all the pharmaceuticals. I did improve my diet dramatically as well. So that did play a part in my health. And as soon as the pain relief was there on a regular basis, I could get outside and start moving more and exercise and build my muscles back up. So that all increases your health as opposed to the pharmaceuticals, which just kind of numb your pain and you want to sit on the couch all the time.
I don't remember who told me this one time, and I want to say it was a doctor. It was a doctor or a nurse, and we was talking about pain medicine, and they told me it's not really doing anything to heal you. It's just tricking your brain, is all it's doing. And so I was like, and when she told me that, I was like, that is wild. And y'all just keep giving it to everybody. And this is way before what we saw with the COVID stuff and how the medical industry went crazy with that stuff. I remember saying something to somebody one time when they were forcing the vaccines and stuff. I said, not to get off on COVID during the show, but I remember saying something. I was like, I don't trust them anymore. Like I used to go to the doctor's office and just trust them, blindly, but they knew what was best for me. They said, take this pill. So I'd take this pill. Didn't think anything else of it. But with all that COVID stuff, man, I remember making a post about it on Facebook too. And the amount of people on my Facebook that, y'all kind of running the same mindset that we do anyway. We're like, yeah, I haven't trusted the medical industry in years. What took you so long? And I was like, I don't know. Maybe it took the COVID vaccine to wake me up to what was going on, but I go twice a year for my regular checkup. One is for work to keep my insurance at a reasonable rate and stuff. And the other one's because they have me come back in 6 months just for another checkup. But I'm always going in there skeptical. Like this last time I went in and I told her about my shoulder, and then she sent me to an orthopedist and they got my shoulder hooked up. I'm good with that now, but I just don't trust them anymore. And I hate that it sucks that you can't go to the doctor and not trust your doctor. It's the same way when you go to the church and you can't trust your pastor, to me. You ought to be able to trust your pastor and your doctor, in my opinion, and your mother, so just stuff like that. But then you lose a lot of trust in this stuff. And I lost a lot of trust in the medical industry. And to hear your story, it sounds like they were just pumping you full of pills. And when he said he wanted to put a morphine pump in your body, you're like, no, I'm not doing that. It's just like that's their only answer to it, is a pump is full of drugs. They're not really scientists. They're drug dealers. That's what they are.
Yeah, I mean, people that are the doctors now were trained at medical schools that were designed by the American Medical Association. That is Rockefeller, the same guy that got cannabis made illegal to begin with. They all play a part in this, and it's not that people join the medical profession these days to scam people or to sell them drugs. I think most people get into it because they legitimately want to help people. But when 100% of the training for doctors in America is through the schools that want them to sell the pharmaceuticals,
right?
That's all they know. So when you go to them with any problem, they want to give you the the Band-Aid for the problem and not find the root cause.
Scott, you had a question. You wanted to say something a while ago. Go ahead.
I think it was when you're talking about the church basically demonizing marijuana. And of course, we can look at where they got that from was from the government. It was never, anything really in Christian culture that made it illegal. However, like as humans, what we do have is the pattern of witch hunting. Like now it's more of a psychological term than like the reality of what it was in the early Americas, where we looked for something to pin all our wrongs on and cast it away. It's really related to scapegoating in the Bible. So you can convince people the goat is evil or that this person's a witch. That's kind of what they did with marijuana. You can look at the psychological pattern, and that's how I'll say even I was deceived that it was a bad thing. Instead of being educated and seeing that, hey, there's all this use for this plant, whether it be the cannabis or the hemp, which I think they're cousins, so maybe they both fall under cannabis. I'm not that educated, I guess, on it. But there's so many uses, and they were used for a lot of our human history, let alone our American history. And then somebody finally witch hunts it and scapegoats all our problems onto it and makes it something that is not within our toolbox of humans to use for our benefit.
I don't know if I learned about it in church. I do remember back, like I said, I was talking about earlier in my early 20s when we were partying all the time. When we were young. It was my first time out of the house. I moved out of my house when I was 18 years old, got an apartment with my buddy, and basically our apartment turned into just traffic. I mean, I was waking up with people late sleep on the floor. I had no idea who they were. And I'm sure everybody here has had those experiences, but I do remember if we were smoking weed, everybody was chilled out. It was chill. But we were drinking at the same time, but maybe marijuana was the equalizer. Now, if we were all just drunk, there's liable to be a fight. I've never one time seen somebody smoking weed and then started a fist fight or abuse their spouse or their children. You know what I'm saying? And people that smoke pot on a regular basis, they don't miss work on a regular basis. People that drink alcohol on a regular basis miss a lot of work, But back then, there was always that stigma, and we'll get into the stigma here in a little bit, about marijuana, and it was illegal, but alcohol was not. And the older I've gotten, I think it should be reversed. If they're going to make something illegal, they probably ought to do the alcohol and let us have the plant, and people be a lot more peaceful, in my opinion. But that's not me advocating for alcohol laws either. I'm just saying, it just seems to me, and I've thought this for a long time, that alcohol is way more dangerous than marijuana ever thought about being. And it's just so strange to me that people can take that and use it to scare people. Do y'all remember the commercial, this is your brain on drugs, the fried egg? Y'all remember that garbage? I wish they would show that stuff today so everybody could just laugh them off of the TV because it's completely ridiculous. Anyway, Jim, you had something to say.
So, I understand why, I definitely understand why you said that, Craig, about, alcohol being more dangerous. But of course, nothing should be illegal because it has the exact opposite effect that we expect it to. Look at the prohibition of alcohol,
right?
And you talk about the culture too. The cultures that were more dominant, that had more power back then, were rejecting. They were using alcohol even though it was illegal. And then the other part was that people who drank, they would go to speakeasies or to sheds or whatever to drink moonshine, and then all of a sudden there'd be other illegal activities entangled with their alcohol use. And you see the same thing with the prohibition of cannabis. So then, when I was younger, I usually got my cannabis secondhand from people because drug dealers didn't trust me. But, the common thing was when you went to a dealer, they would expect you to match them a joint, right? So you drive over to their place and you'd get marijuana from them. They'd expect you to smoke one joint with them, and then they'd smoke one joint with you, and then you were supposed to drive home, So now that it's legal, though, you go to a place. Obviously, you're not going to do it there. You can be sober as a nun, go home and enjoy it responsibly. And then you talk about like the gang activity with alcohol during prohibition of alcohol. It's the same thing with the gang activity with cannabis. So it's like as soon as you try to make as soon as you try to enforce something, you're creating a black market, and it's causing more trouble. And then, like I said, when I was a teenager, it was easier for me to get cannabis because it was from a dealer than it was for me to get alcohol, because it was so easy for adults to enjoy alcohol responsibly if they chose to, that, nobody was selling black market moonshine to teenagers, And so, but at the same time, the kid who dropped out of high school, I could get marijuana from him, that was the big thing. So that's always the temptation, right? Like, we only have one Father as Christians, we only, that's what Jesus taught us, right? But we always try to turn these policy enforcers, into these father figures where it's like, no, we need to make something illegal to protect the children, but always like backfires, and it just causes more problems.
Well, the war on drugs is a prime example of that. I mean, if there wasn't a war on drugs, I don't think we'd be having near the issues with fentanyl that we're having right now. I mean, the government, and it's everything they touch, they screw up. And I honestly don't believe that their war on drugs was a benefit or was for our benefit. Like they're trying to protect us somehow. I don't believe that whatsoever. I think it was all about power and control and another revenue source to lock people up. I read something the other day that 86% of the people in American prisons today are in there for victimless crimes. And the vast majority of them are in there for marijuana. And because they won't get off these stupid laws about marijuana. And it's so, now that you're seeing it become more legal, legal, I hate using that word too, but these people are still in prison. I mean, some of them got life sentences for having some marijuana back in when they started the war on drug stuff. That's a waste. You're wasting people's lives over a plant. And it infuriates me. Scott, go ahead.
I was going to say we've touched on it kind of before and during the program, and probably will touch on it even after, but it keeps coming up that it's about control. And that's the reality of it. By making it illegal, it causes problems, and it in a sense gets out of their control. And I see that as like to their own detriment. By them removing it from society has caused a lot of the problems that we have, especially like with having the highest population of prisoners in the world in a free country. They're creating the issues.
That's excellent too, because it's an excellent point. I mean, if I would like to see just like a 6-month period where the government just stopped enforcing any of these laws, let everybody out of prison that was in there for marijuana, and let's see what would happen if it was legal for 6 months. And let's see what happened. I think crime rates would go down for one. I think drug use would probably go down. When you start forcing people into prison for something like this, it's the same thing with like the COVID vaccine. I keep bringing it up, but if you'd have left people alone, they might have got the shots more. They probably would have done it without you trying to force them to do it, and you would have been more productive in getting your shots produced in people. But the fact that they were trying to force it, and it's the same thing with this, with the forcing the control of the marijuana, it's causing people to do more things. And I'm not advocating, I don't want people going out there shooting up heroin, but if you want to do that and you can do it without harming other people, that's your business. I don't recommend it. I don't have a problem with anybody smoking marijuana. I don't see the issue with it anymore. And I don't like the modern day Pharisee type Christians who come out and say, well, you're altering your mind. And I want to get into that in a second after William says what he has to say. Go ahead, William.
I got permission from my buddy to mention his name, talking about people being incarcerated. He just got an uncle that got out of jail. I think he was in there at least like 15 years. I think it was for just like possession. Man, they just throw the book at this guy. And he's told me about different details about the case. And I'm absolutely horrified. And just seeing he just got out of prison out of being there 15 years. And it's like just seeing them unite around this guy. And my heart goes out to him. It's like, man, let's help reintegrate this guy and get him plugged back into life again. And what you're talking about, backing people up in a corner and forcing them to do things that could get them in trouble. My wife was anorexic, growing up. And because of that, her teeth demineralized. We weren't meth heads or anything, but when her teeth started breaking apart at a pretty young age, after we were married, just with scrambled eggs, we're talking just incredible pain. Her teeth were falling out. It was absolutely horrific. She used to have a beautiful smile, and I watched my wife go through that. And the thing is, we went to the dentist and they said, well, you got to pay all this money to get care, and we're not going to give you any pain medication. It made us look like drug users. Go to the ER. They definitely wouldn't do anything. And here I am, an EMT, and I'm working all these crazy hours for everybody else's BS. And I can't even take care of the woman I love most in the world. Yeah, you better believe I chose my wife over choosing to follow the law. Yeah, I did things to get what I needed so she could have pain relief. I could do no less and see myself as a man, and it shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't have to go, for legal reasons, this is a joke. I shouldn't have to go on the dark net, learn how to transfer Bitcoin, use tails to cover my tracks, and buy weed pens. This has been years back. We'll buy weed pens because I don't trust anybody else to ask the question of, hey, where can I get some help with this? She was allergic to narcotics. Like she can't have like the heavy pain meds. They expected her to be asking for hydrocodone and all this kind of mess. She's just like, no, I can't take that. I need something like tramadol or something like that. And that still made her look suspicious. And yeah, it's a wake-up call to people. What are you going to do to take care of your family? Are you going to allow the government to tell you that you have someone suffering with anxiety, suffering from PTSD, things like that? I watched my wife just go through horrible anxiety attacks, PTSD attacks, dissociative attacks to where she wouldn't even remember who I was. She'd be flashing back. I watched her suffer. We were dry. I had old bong, right? And I'm going to give the credit to God. I know who told me who to do it. It was the Lord told me to do this. He said, go scrape the resin off of that bong, roll her up into a cigarette and let her smoke it. And I was in St. Joseph, Louisiana. I don't mind telling you where I was at. We were going through all kinds of craziness, man. Both me and my wife were just out of our minds with anxiety, not knowing where our life was going and everything. The whole world had just blown up. And she had a 3-day anxiety attack. No joke. She's sitting on this, and I got the video of this as proof. She's sitting out on her swing, and I went scraped the resin off of that bong and mixed it up with an old cigarette and rolled it up, and I let her smoke it. And I kid you not, God as my witness, within less than a minute, she was snapped out of it. She started weeping. She's like come to herself. She had instant relief. I didn't give the glory to a plant. I didn't give the glory to the devil. I give the glory to the creator of heaven and earth, who spoke it into existence on the third day of creation and called it good. That's where I stand.
William is a preacher. Preach, my brother. Listen to this guy go. That was good. That was good. I want Jim and Aaron to touch on this a little bit too, and then I want to go into like the stigma, and then I think after the stigma, we're going to talk about the what I mentioned a while ago, like your modern day Pharisee type Christians. How I want y'all to answer, each of y'all to give them an answer when they're like that you're just doing it to alter your mind. Okay, but we'll get into that in a second. Aaron?
No, I would just have to say that, I agree wholeheartedly with William that, when I realized that it is a plant, that's what we're using in our world to do this healing, but it is God that put that plant there for us, and it's all by his design. So yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that.
Hey folks, we have set up a very simple way to donate to the Bad Roman Project through spotfund.com. Just go to SpotFund and search No King But Christ. This has become necessary to continue to provide a quality podcast and keep production costs down as well. Just $5 or $10 a month will go a long way in helping us keep this project going and continue spreading the very basic message of No King But Christ. So if you like what we were doing and can find it within your budget, go to spotfund.com and search No King But Christ, and you can set up monthly donations or even donate one time. Any and all donations help more than you know, and as always, any donations above production costs will go directly to charities in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank y'all so much. Now back to the show. I want to touch. I told y'all about this film that was made back in 1936, and y'all are aware of it. It's called Reefer Madness. And my friends who stopped by last night, and I told them we were going to be doing this podcast today, she mentioned this film to me. I was aware of the name, but I'd never sat and watched it. I watched like the first 30 seconds of this film and was cracking up because just the fear mongering behind this in 1936 was hilarious to me, the way they were describing it. Well, there's an opening scroll, like when you watch like Star Wars and you see the words going across the screen, you're reading all that as it's going. It's kind of the same thing with this, but it's not like at a slant. It's called an opening scroll. And I'm going to read, maybe I'll read it all to you, but it starts out, the motion picture you are about to witness may startle you. It would not have been possible otherwise to sufficiently emphasize the frightful toll of the new drug menace, which is destroying the youth of America in alarmingly increasing numbers. Marijuana is that drug, a violent narcotic, an unspeakable scourge, the real public enemy number one. Its first effect is sudden, violent, uncontrollable laughter, then dangerous hallucinations. Space expands, time slows down, almost stands still. Fixed ideas come next. Conjuring up monstrous extravagances, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, followed by emotional disturbances, the total inability to direct thoughts, the loss of all power to resist physical emotions, leading finally to acts of shocking violence, ending often in incurable insanity. In picturing its soul-destroying effects, no attempt was made to equivocate. The scenes and incidents, while fictionized, for the purposes of this story, are based upon actual research into the results of marijuana addiction. If their stark reality will make you think, will make you aware that something must be done to wipe out this ghastly menace, then the picture will not have failed in its purpose, because the dread marijuana may be reaching forth next for your son or daughter, or yours. And I started laughing during that, and I barely made it through without laughing through it all. William, you have something to say. Go ahead.
The only violence I feel right now is to like this pecan pie candy bar. I'm going to do so much violence to this candy bar.
But this thing right here, this is 1936. And the way they were describing how it affects people, I've never seen anybody high on marijuana act like what they were just describing ever in my life. And I wonder how much that infiltrated the church. That thought process has infiltrated the church back then to get people to push them away from a plant. And just the whole thing that was being said right there is just, it's comical. It doesn't even, if anybody's thinking that way these days, you've just, I don't even know how to describe a person like that. It's 2023. It's not 1936. I mean, I know times were different back then, but the stuff they were putting out, they knew they were lying to you then. And there's still people that believe this. Anyway, Jim, you had something to say.
There's that scene in Reefer Madness where the girl eats the hot dog and it screams, and that was like the most traumatizing experience of her life. So hopefully, William, eating that pecan pie doesn't traumatize you. It's one of those things where you watch it as like a normal person and you're like thinking to yourself, boy, I think you have other issues if you were traumatized by that hot dog.
So the hot dog screamed at her? I haven't watched the whole film.
Yeah, it's just basically like, don't smoke marijuana because you might have this traumatizing psychedelic experience from eating a hot dog. It's like one of those things where it's like that actually happened. You probably like look back at it the next day and be like, why was I having an anxiety attack? Maybe I should take it easy when I'm hitting the bong tomorrow.
If I saw a hot dog scream, I'd be like trying to sit there and help my hot dog work through its issues, man. I wouldn't like get mad at it or anything. I'm here to help, brother. What's wrong? You have a little anxiety? You missed the bond? I get you. Here, have a little mustard. This will help.
It's gonna hard for me to be serious after this. But I know we're gonna also talk about being sober-minded. And like this kind of ties into it because I do not believe the Bible is telling us not to use substances, because you do have a line from Paul to Timothy, like use a little bit of wine for your stomach. There's some lines that Paul says about, the word is translated to witchcraft, but pharmaceutica, or some kind of ancient Greek word that we still use for pharmacy and drugs today. I don't really think that's the physical wasn't the point. It was the sober thinking, like be clear, not necessarily taking things to alter your mind, but be clear and like think about the mental practices Christ commanded us to, not to be judgmental, not to be in worry. And I'll just use those two because like fear, that is the selling technique from human institutions such as government, and I'll even pick on the church. The church as a human institution promotes fear so it can control. To be of sober mind is to be free from the worry, free from judgment, so you can see what things really are. And we can see, like, when we're clearly removing worry and fear, has marijuana made the world a worse place? No. People would go on vacation to places like Jamaica just so they could enjoy it. There's these steps that you can see, like, when these things become a problem is when people are basically acting out of fear and worry. So the sober-mindedness has to be around clear thinking and giving things our attention to actually see what the results are. And what we can see with each one of our lives is how marijuana has helped us in one way or another.
Go ahead, William.
So what I was going to say about sober-mindedness is that Jesus himself said that it's not what a man puts into his mouth, puts into his body is what defiles him, but it's what comes out. And here's my honest assessment of this, being very knowledgeable of myself because of the hell I've been through, just mental and emotional issues, things like that. God really had to take me on a journey of self-discovery. I had to learn cause and effect, where all these things came from, what I was responsible for, what I was not responsible for. So I got to know myself. And I'm a very introspective person as it is. This just takes it to a completely different level. And what I found is that when I do smoke or use gummy or tincture or whatever, that from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. What we have a problem is not a substance issue, it's a heart issue. Okay? And what this does is that it allows things that we normally disassociate from or shut off or don't give voice to, it allows them to come up and out. And let me tell you something, if you have the love of Christ on the inside of your heart, oh my goodness, that's what's going to come out. That's what I've seen in my experience. Craig, this is, we've talked about some things before and everything like that. That time I reached out to you, dude, I had gummies on board. And man, I'm telling you, I felt the Holy Spirit and it started inspiring me to write and reach out to you, brother, and everything. And you're not the only one that's happened to, man. I've got customers, man, to where I'm just able to flow and love to them and able to speak a word of encouragement. I have grown men weeping in my store at times, and we go through different things, and I'm able to walk with them through that, and they leave feeling a touch from the Lord. I believe I know it. I see the effect. And a lot of times what this does, it doesn't cloud my mind. It just shoves all the mess. It gets rid of all the adware, and it allows what's in here to come out in a way that I'm not shutting myself off, worried about what people are going to think. I'm not worried about what I sound like. Man, I just step out and I give voice to the spirit that's on the inside of me. And that's where I'm coming from with this. It's not, I'm not sitting over here in a daze. I mean, I've as far as one hitter goes, I've been using a one hitter and I've lit up about 8 times. I'm with it. I'm not sitting here counting sheep or seeing stuff weird in corners. I want to connect with people. It doesn't make me want to isolate. And when I'm down in depression and anxiety and the deep, dark melancholy that I've suffered from all my life, this brings me out and it brings me into the light. It doesn't make me hide in the darkness. So that's it.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I kind of liked where William was going with that quite a bit, actually. And I just wanted to tell a kind of a quick story about when I did get into marijuana and started growing it. There was that heart of this needs to go to people who can help, not just receiving donations and just supplying my own financial needs. And I had this guy that I met. We were looking for things to kind of do in the community to do good works. And we went to this event that this guy was putting on at this place called Garage of Blessings. This place was like, it's where people can take your donations like a thrift store, and homeless people can come in, or not even have to be homeless people that are down and out and need things like dressers, clothes, kitchen utensils, whatever. Like they could come and get these things. And this guy's vision was, not everybody can make it here. Let's round up a van of people, bring out sack lunches and all this stuff, and let them pick through what they can have. Now, I say that to say this. This was the hugest pothead I had ever met at the time. This dude would blow through an ounce in a week, easy. And I would always kind of just like, wow, bro, don't you think you're doing a little too much here? But he had had an accident, was riding his bike to work one day in Florida, and had got hit by a car and had terrible body pains ever since. And the weed would help him get out of whatever pain and misery he was in and be out on the street literally helping people. Now, here's the crazy part. Actually, it's not crazy, it's normal, and unfortunately, but it should be crazy, is he came under scrutiny for everything he was doing by pastors. And it wasn't even about his weed smoke. They would only bring that up to kind of like, look at this guy and he's doing things that he's not under our covering, so to speak, doing. But to me, I saw Jesus. I saw the one that said, when you help the least of these, you're doing to me. And like, in a sense, to judge him because he smokes weed. I mean, I honestly look back at that time. This was about 10 years ago in hindsight. And I fully believe that all these pastors that were like warning people to stay away from him were feeling guilty that they were not the ones on the street reaching out to the broken and the lost like Christ wanted us to, or wants us to.
Judging by what you and William were saying, and I like what William said too about it doesn't cloud his mind. It really kind of opens things up. And I think that's the misconception about marijuana with a lot of folks, is it just dumbs you down. And I don't think that's true. Now, there's times, don't get me wrong, back in the day when we were doing it all night long, and you get to a point where you're just blitzed, and maybe it does dumb you down and you're just kind of just spaced out. We were having this conversation last night, and she was talking about making some brownies she had some kind of the oil that she was using to put with the brownies, but she was using scoop for scoop like she would like a regular vegetable oil or something that she was using to make brownies. And they made these brownies, and they ate her. I think it was her and her son. And I hope she doesn't get mad at me for telling on her, but they ate one brownie and they were like, I don't really feel anything. So they ate another brownie, and then they said, she said for the next 6 hours, they didn't say another word. And they binged on that show. Y'all remember the show Vikings? They watched Vikings for the rest of the night and didn't say another word to each other. So I think that you can overdo it and get to a point where you are just kind of you're not there. But if you're doing it recreationally, I don't think it clouds people like people think it does. I've had some very interesting conversations with folks when I'm completely sober and they're high, but they can hold a conversation, and we're having some deep conversations. William talked about a while ago when he reached out to me that night. It was one of those nights where and I'm a lot better now. But when I was having a really bad night about TJ's passing, and just out of the blue, I got a message from William. And it was one of the most beautiful messages I've got from anybody in regards to TJ. And it really pulled me out because I was alone. I was in a dark place. And then here comes William with this message out of the blue. And he says he had a feeling he needed to reach out to me. And whether it was God or marijuana or whatever, I'm glad he did, because he pulled me out. Anyway, Jim, you had something to say.
Well, I just, I definitely know that, and I don't know if it's my ADHD, but I know that I definitely can't do things when I'm enjoying marijuana as efficiently, but they're a lot more fun. It makes my ADHD fun, but at the same time, I sober up before I'm going to do paperwork or something. But if I'm playing cards on a Saturday night, it's going to be a lot more fun. I might not win at cards as much, but that's my whole thing. And the funny thing about it is it does affect everybody very differently. And there are so many different forms of it and so many different types of marijuana. Unfortunately, they're called strains, which I know for people who aren't familiar with marijuana, that might sound a little intimidating that they're called strains. But, indicas, sativas, they all affect people differently. And I just want, put that out there. It's like what you guys were saying too about like how alcohol makes people anxious. Well, yeah, maybe you should take a break from alcohol, and then sometimes maybe people should take a break from marijuana. I know that if I stop using marijuana for a couple of months and then I do it on a Saturday night, I tend to basically, especially if I've been really anxious that week, I tend to have an epiphany. Like I start, because all of a sudden you get all wound up, and all of a sudden your head clears and you're like, oh, I'm stressing out way too much about this, and things, just tend to clear out. But then, if I get in a situation where I'm doing it regularly, I might not have that. And it's different for everybody, but I'm just, basically putting that out there.
Well, see, that's interesting too, because, and speaking of my brother TJ, he tried to smoke marijuana, and I think I mentioned this in the episodes we did about him, but it had an effect on where it just made him too anxious. He didn't like it. It made him way too anxious. So his crutch was alcohol, which ended up killing him. So I don't know. I mean, like you said, it affects people differently, but it did affect him in that way. But then maybe he just enjoyed alcohol more. I don't really know. I mean, he's not here to speak about it, but I just do remember that. And my mom talking about how it made him so anxious, so he quit doing it. Go ahead, Aaron.
I was just going to say, it depends a little bit on like the dose and the person too. Like as a medical patient, one of the things I learned is we have an endocannabinoid system in our body that makes an analog to THC. When your body is healthy and it has all the omega acids and all the things that your body should have nutritionally, it makes its own cannabinoids to keep you healthy. The endocannabinoid system is the system that regulates all the other systems like your cardiovascular and circulatory and your nervous system. That's why it can fix so much, is because it regulates everything. So as a medical patient, sometimes I think it's a little bit cute to hear recreational users talk, because like my baseline for a day is to use a gram of cannabis oil basically. And it's been my baseline for over a decade. And really it doesn't even get me high anymore. That's like, because my body wasn't healing properly with its own endocannabinoids and I needed to supplement, which is when I started using cannabis. It didn't have a baseline. So the 1 gram a day became my baseline. It only took like a week. And then after a week, 14 days, that didn't really get me high anymore, but it still did everything that my body needed. It still relieved anxiety. It still relieved pain. It still, was an anti-inflammatory. It helped me sleep. So it's kind of crazy because I don't smoke at all anymore, because if you can consume a gram a day of oil, like smoking is just kind of makes you cough. It doesn't really, you don't feel it hardly at all. So there are levels to it. And honestly, as far as being sober minded, one of the things that THC does is it promotes neurogenesis. So if we're talking about how it affects your mind, it actually helps you regrow brain cells, which is the antithesis of the opposite of what the government tells us that it can do. So in the long run, even though it'll make you a little goofy before it puts you to sleep if you're not used to a particular dose, it's literally not doing any damage. In fact, it's healing things while it's doing all that. So it's kind of like a bonus.
That's interesting. So you're saying that it actually produces brain cells and does not destroy them like they want us to believe.
I don't remember the exact biological mechanics, but it somehow promoted the growth of new brain cells. Yeah.
Interesting. I've never heard that before. We've always heard the opposite. Like you said, it's not what the government's telling us for sure. Anybody else want to touch on that? I want to talk about Genesis 1:29 real quick. And then before we end the show, I want each of y'all to go, like we talked about the modern day Pharisees. I want y'all to speak from your heart and tell them what you think about it, and how when you see people say you shouldn't be using marijuana because it alters your mind and it's you're not sober on marijuana and all this stuff. And I want y'all to come at from a Christian perspective on that for people listening who might be on, because I'm sure I'm going to get some messages about this, and that's fine. I get messages about quite a few of them. William touched on this a little bit in the beginning. In Genesis 1:29, it says, "And God said, Behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food." Okay, and that was the ESV version that I just read. So what do y'all take from that when he says y'all shall use it for food instead? You know what I'm saying? Like he's saying use it for food. Are we using marijuana for food when we're using it to decrease our anxiety or to heal our pain? Or you know what I'm saying? Like we talk about a healthy diet to help for health benefits. So in my mind, when he's saying use this for food, if you can use it for health benefits, that's the way I read that scripture. Scott, go ahead.
Well, it's fully edible. You can make it into brownies. Actually, I plan to make some, some kind of like Rice Krispie treats, but you use Lucky Charms instead and make that kind of infused with some coconut butter I have that's infused with THC and actually a whole plant. I like to use whole plant myself, not just like take one thing out of it. So yeah, obviously everything that grows has some kind of benefit to us. It's part of the gift. It's part of how nature, God created this whole ecosystem to work together. So to almost demonize it and say something that it's not of God in a sense is like, I guess you could say borderline blasphemy. If it's his creation, like, and he's the one who put all this stuff together, and we don't have any evidence in scripture or in science that there's some other evil entity that's planting things that are bad for us. We know things like can be poisonous, but a lot of those things we use for medicine too. It's just us figuring out how to use creation for our benefit. And that's part of the gift of God. And to touch on the religious aspect to speak to the Pharisee, so to speak, that's exactly what a Pharisee is. It's an accuser. They go by the law of Moses, so to speak, to try to find wrong. And this verse has been standing out to me, that Jesus, in conversation with the Pharisees, says, you persecuted John and he only ate locusts and honey. That's a highly disciplined life. And now you persecute the Son of Man for eating and drinking. So no matter if you're somebody who eats and drinks, or you're somebody who lives a very disciplined life, your Pharisee characters are judging them for one way or the other. And it doesn't matter what they do. It's just the fact that they're judgmental. And it also shows that they ignore the teachings of Christ when he calls us into a new covenant. And that new covenant comes from Jeremiah, where it's the Lord directing us what to do. So I can honestly say God brought marijuana into my life. And I've learned a heck of a lot just from that. Like I mentioned, that what else can I not trust the government for? That's when I started looking into 9/11. And I thought that was just a terrorist attack, but there's more questions than we have answers for. So he used it, in a sense, to open my mind so I could see him clearer. I'm trying to think of other things. But yeah, I mean, it's not like I can't say marijuana was the savior of all things. Not at all. And I want to make sure like that's coming across clear. But God uses everything to help us learn and grow in this gift of life that he's given us. And for me, if I was like, and I have to admit, I've been a Pharisee in my life, and I've pointed out to other people what I think they should be doing differently. But if I'm understanding the new covenant, that's God's job. And my job is to love and to serve. And I'm getting outside of what God has called me to if I'm telling people how to live their lives. I'm supposed to help, yes. But I'm not here to be a king. We already have a king in Christ, like the flag says in the background.
No king but Christ. Yeah, in your opinion, should people, I think what I gathered from what you just said as far as the Pharisees side of it, are you saying that they shouldn't be judging people for using a plant that God gave us?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Even if it's just to knock the edge off. I mean, I don't think that's a fair judgment of anybody, because I think everybody's, and I don't even really want to use the term vice with marijuana. Maybe it is for some folks. I don't know.
I'll say it this way as well. It's like, it's them trying to deal with other people's sins because they don't want to deal with their own.
I think everybody's got their own thing going that they hold on to. And I think it's unfair to judge people who is using a plant that was given to us.
Honestly, I'm like super disciplined with it. I eat it more than I smoke. And a lot of times I smoke like a very small amount. I'll get laughed at probably by saying how much I smoke a night is 0.17 of a gram. That's how much I smoke a night. That's it. And like I'll eat these gummies from time to time. And it does enough so my body feels better the next day at work. Like I'm a carpenter. I've got elbow and joint issues, and yes, I take glucosamine and some other things to help with that. But it really helps on the pain level. And when I was a heavier drinker to cover up the body pains when I was in my 30s, like I'm pushing 50 now, the alcohol would only last, that night, kind of thing. It wouldn't, make me feel better the next day. The CBD.
And you woke up feeling like garbage, like you were dying.
Very much so. Very much so.
And that's, I don't remember I don't remember that ever being a problem with me. If I never woke up feeling like I was dying if I got high the night before. Even in my early 20s, when we were partying, if I drank too much, I woke up feeling like I was dying. Now, if I do it these days, I really feel like I'm dying when I wake up because I'm not 22 years old anymore.
Yep.
Body can't handle that poison. Anyway, go ahead, Aaron.
I was just going to add to the Bible verse, the Genesis verse about using it as food, is that, we're talking about smoking it and using it like that. But really the plant, especially in Genesis, there was no designation between hemp and cannabis. It was all the same plant back then. It's humans that have taken the one plant that God gave us and said, oh, this would be really good for fiber. And then we take that and we take those strains and we, keep breeding them for fiber. And we think, oh, this will make really good fuel oil, or this will make really good a protein source. So we take those plants and we breed them for seed production. And then, we found out in human history that part of the plant does, get us high. It has a medicinal effect. So, there's a whole line of human history where we took the plant and we bred it just to make the beautiful sparkly trichomes on the plant, for that purpose. So, in modern days, we forget about being able to use it for food, but really the plant, when it grows out in nature, it's a plant that has male and females. So when it grows out in nature, there's both. There's no humans to get involved. And so it gets pollinated. It produces seeds. But on the seeds, even a lot of people talk about, well, if you're going to grow a plant for seeds, then it doesn't produce resin anymore, and vice versa. But that's not really true. The plant still has where the seed comes out, it's got a little green part that covers up the seed, and that green part is completely covered in trichomes. So if you were to just harvest all of those seeds out in nature from a wild population, you would have a food source that was quote unquote contaminated with the medicine, the trichomes from the outside of the plant. So, the whole plant really is a source of nutrition because, if you need protein, if you're deficient in protein, you have to eat it. And you have to consume protein. So if you're deficient in cannabinoids, I know modern science and modern medicine doesn't really teach us this, but if you're deficient in cannabinoids, really the only way to make up for it is to consume cannabinoids or to consume the foods like the omega fatty acids in the cannabis seed to produce more cannabinoids. And you can do both. You can supplement or you can take the seed and it helps you produce more of your own. So it's really, Genesis knows what it's talking about, when it says use it for food, because you kind of get every use of the plant if you take it literally like that.
William, do you want to touch on Genesis 1:29 or?
Yeah, I started smoking, like I said, when I was in my early 30s, and it was actually about 4 years ago. I was sitting on my couch where we were living at the time, and I was really struggling with the idea of me ingesting cannabis and my relationship with God, because I was dealing with what had been preached thus far, but I was looking at the evidence, I was looking at the history, I was seeing the cause and effect, how everything had played out, and then my own experience, how beneficial it had been to me. I was sitting on my couch, and I felt something say, and it laid it out in Genesis, okay, what was created on the third day of creation? Answer, plants. What was said after those plants were created? It is good. All right. So you have something that's created. You have something that's called good. We also have in scripture saying that he's the maker and nothing without him that was made was made. So he defines who made it, that it was good, and that no one else had a part in making what was made. So we can't say the devil did it. We can't deny that he did it. It just didn't appear of its own. And that same voice asked me and told me, he said, asked me those questions and then said, what right does man have to call something I created and call good evil? And what right does man have to call something I call evil good? And that let me know right there that man can say one thing and man can say another thing, but God is ultimately the true north of what we should think about something. And I choose to go with that. And people in the church can say, well, that's not God and you're lost, you're going to hell. Let me tell you something. I'll let you talk about my cannabis usage when you start talking to some of your young preachers about downing Red Bull in the Sunday school rooms before they get up and go preach. All right. You want to play this game? We'll play this game, but I want something that's going to bring me peace of mind. I don't want something that's going to amp me up. And that's what this has done. I've struggled with fear and anxiety all my life, not being able to adjust to my life circumstances, having one thing hit me after another, being scared of men, being scared of authority, being scared of myself, not knowing how to express myself in a healthy way emotionally, extreme emotional dysregulation. And man, yeah, I may cry like a baby when I'm on weed. And let me tell you something. I was having a real bad depressive episode 2 years ago. I'd been smoking. I was laying in the recliner and I was just like, man, I was dealing. And my wife comes in and said, you need to listen to this song. And I wasn't even half paying attention to it. And it was that song, Another in the Fire. And man, part of my subconscious mind, even though I wasn't even focused on it, was playing the background. It latched onto that and it snatched my attention to that song. I said, what is that? And I broke down, cuddled on that chair, weeping like a baby as the Spirit of the Lord entered into that room and began to minister to me where I was hurting. Don't you dare tell me that this is of the devil. I know my Father's voice, and the Lord speaks to me when I'm able to cut out all the noise. And I may not be acceptable in churches, but I don't care because the people God sends me to aren't even in church. Okay? He sends people to me that are lost, broken, and hurting that aren't expecting to be ministered to, not expecting the Spirit of the Lord to touch them where they're at because they're not in a church. I don't look like a guy that goes to church. Okay? I'm a big, hairy dude with tattoos. Some people are intimidated of me when they see me, man, but God has given me a gift where people get around me and they just drop their guard and they drop their walls. And this is something that's allowed me to better hone that skill and be able to connect with people. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
So, just a small little thing about, eating the plants and Genesis 1:29. It's like I was telling you about how people grew plants on state land and they'd have to do things to make sure that the deer and the elk didn't eat them because they would eat the marijuana plants that these people were trying to grow because they know it's good. The elk and the deer know what's good. But when it comes to, what William was talking about earlier too, about, what goes in your mouth isn't as important as what comes out because that's what speaks from your heart in reference to Matthew 15:17 through 19, that Jesus taught us that, it's like, I know when I drank alcohol, I would say terrible things. It put my heart in a bad place. And I've never had that experience from marijuana specifically. I might be in a bad place, but it's not because of the marijuana. And then also, when you talk about the Pharisees, it's interesting because I know that it's Matthew 24 at the end when Jesus is talking about the faithful servant, and he gives the example of the unfaithful servant who thinks that God's not watching, so he parties and gets drunk. You talk about like sober-mindedness, like, yeah, obviously, we shouldn't overdo it. We shouldn't let things get out of control. We shouldn't put our desire to party and feel good and short-term gratification ahead of our relationship with God. That's obviously something that Jesus spoke against. Then again, he turned water to wine at the wedding, because it isn't necessarily a bad thing to partake in wine. But, if you're getting drunk and partying and putting that ahead of your work in the name of the Lord, that's obviously a bad thing. But the thing that I definitely go to all the time, and it's interesting because you're always talking about Romans 13, Craig. This is Romans 14. That starts out with, accept other believers who are weak in faith, and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't, and those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. Who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Their master will judge whether they stand or fall, and with the Lord's help, they will stand and receive his approval. In the same way, some think one day is more holy than another, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. So, you look at why Jesus was Jewish. The Sabbath for Jesus was sundown Friday night to sundown Saturday night. And as Christians, most Christians look at the Sabbath as Sunday. And, it goes to that passage in Romans 14 and some of the things we've been talking about. It's not about specifically one day is more sacred than another. Just like if you are the kind of person who decides as an act of faith, I'm going to engage in asceticism. I'm not going to smoke marijuana. I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm not going to eat meat, and I'm just only going to do things like that on one specific day of the week. That's your relationship with God. That's you that's you basically making the sacrifice that I'm going to take this time to, specifically give it all to God, or to discipline myself. I know whenever I go to church, before they give the offering, they always say that you have to have the right spirit when you give. And it's the same thing when people are engaging in Lent, in asceticism, right? Like, if you aren't going to eat meat on Friday because you feel like your culture forces you to, and you're going to have a bad attitude about it, you might as well eat meat, right? And it's the same thing, when we look at, is there any place that Jesus says that you shouldn't smoke marijuana? No, So, why do we think that marijuana is somehow worse? And it all comes back to some cultural perspective. One time, I think when you were talking to Larkin Rosen, you said the old time Christian perspective, the old church, you said something about the 1950s, Craig.
I said the old, when I mention old time religion, I'm talking about the first 400 years of the church. Not, a lot of times you hear those songs, old time religion, they're talking about like the 1950s and 60s. When I mention old time religion, I'm talking about the first 4 centuries. I want to get back to that when it comes to the church.
Yeah. And that's just it. So when, I think sometimes people confuse that, especially with things like marijuana. It's like this dominant culture of the 1950s that has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus. And that's their, that would be my answer to the Pharisees is look at Romans 14. It's not about the culture of the 1950s. It's about your personal relationship with God.
There you go. Aaron, what do you have to say?
I was just going to point out, I think it is in the book Hashish by Robert Connell Clark. He kind of goes over the history of cannabis and hashish use in the world. And it's not really relevant to the discussion about morality or ethics or anything like that, or medicine. But I thought it was interesting when I read that book that he pointed out that at the time period when Jesus was alive in Israel, 1 in 3 men somehow consumed cannabis. And I don't think they were really smoking it back then, so I don't know what that meant. If it was they were using it like an incense and inhaling it, or if it was if they were putting it in food, but I just thought that was interesting that while Jesus was alive, that period in history, 1 in 3 Jewish men consumed cannabis somehow.
Interesting. I was unaware of that. So any of y'all have any final comments before I shut this down? Or, because we've gone about an hour and a half now, and then before we go, if y'all have anything you want to plug, then I'll let y'all do that as well. But any final thoughts on anything that y'all want to say to people about what we're talking about today? Because it's a conversation that we probably need to have again at some point, because I'm looking forward to the pushback that I might get for this episode. I don't think that I'm going to get a whole lot, because there's a lot of the folks that that listen to this, or whether they smoke marijuana or use it for medicine or however they do it, if they don't use it, a lot of folks really don't care if you are using it. But there's some out there that are going to be new to the project and come across this episode that may have some more questions about it. If y'all have any final thoughts, I'd appreciate that.
I would remind people that you did talk, Craig, to Jared Wall a little bit in episode 85 about marijuana. So if they want to hear more about that on the Bad Roman, they should go back to that episode. And he mentioned the book Smoke Signals. And I haven't got a chance to check that out, but it seems like it'd be really interesting and it would really add to this conversation.
Yeah, that was a great episode. And he did talk about, he had his own business that he basically, the banks were basically shutting him down because of what he was doing. And which, the banks are in cahoots with the government. So, it's where it all comes back to anyways, the government trying to make this the devil's lettuce when it's not. It's God's plant. And I think that's something everybody should remember when it comes to this, is it's something God gave us. Now, it's not saying we should abuse it or anything like that, but if people are using it for health-wise or just to knock the edge off, I just don't see the problem. I just don't see it. And I think that at some point, the stigma behind marijuana has got to go away. And I think if the more states, God, I hate bringing up my old statist mentality when it comes to the Constitution and stuff, but if more states just started following the 10th Amendment and ignoring federal laws which are 100% unconstitutional, then it wouldn't matter what the federal government's saying about it. If your states, I live in Tennessee, and they're pretty hell-bent on not legalizing any of it, even for medical use, it seems like. So they'll be probably one of the last states standing, but I think at some point every state's going to be like, we're going to allow this. And then once that happens, then I don't know. I hate going back to that mentality, but it's the truth. People need to start waking up and seeing, like, tell the government to get bent. And just start doing this. If it makes you happy, do what makes you happy. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of back that up a little bit, like, no matter what you put into somebody's hands, they can use for good or bad. And I can even pick on, the Christian religions. I'm not saying following Christ. I'm making a separation here. Is that a lot of people even use the Bible to hurt, scare, fear, and do that kind of stuff. So it's a human thing. We can weaponize anything as humans and use it against another person. And I think that's the kind of the thing that we have to clue in on. When we're talking about anything from marijuana to how you use a Bible verse. Are you using this to edify, yourself or others? Are you making a positive impact? Or are you basically walking and thinking in like a negativity or a wrong spirit promoting things?
Well, and one thing that I really wanted to get across with this episode is the medical side of it and how it helps people heal.
Yeah.
Because that side's so important to me, because it's being talked about more and more. And I love the stuff that Aaron has been able to add to the conversation, the stuff he knows about in the situation that he had with his back, and how he was able to get off of pharmaceutical pills by using what God gave us already. And you're not using a man-made pill to alleviate some pain. It's not even alleviating the pain. It's not fixing the problem. It's just making your body, it's killing you.
Yeah.
We were talking about this last night too. Every other commercial we saw on TV was a pharmaceutical commercial. Mm-hmm. It was wild. We were watching just kind of back and forth during conversation, watching a movie, and in between the commercials, there was one segment, there was like 3 pharmaceutical commercials before it got back to the movie.
Yeah. And I think like all of us have stories of our own that how marijuana has helped and led us to healing. Like I can even say it for many, many family members as well, religious or not. And I think the evidence is there. We just have to kind of keep opening our own eyes and hopefully open the eyes of the people that just want to demonize it.
How about you, Preacher William? You got any final thoughts?
Reverend William.
We're going to start calling him Rev.
The Rev.
God.
The Rev.
God. Man, this has been an amazing conversation. I was kind of nervous, but honestly, the last few days with just everything God has done in my life, um, it's been amazing. We were able to get a new vehicle a couple of weeks ago, and then the other vehicle that we were using, it's gone. It caught on fire. Uh, but God just worked it out to where we were able to get that new vehicle. My in-laws helped us out. They've been such a blessing. The amount of money they gave us for the down payment on the vehicle, they were getting some floor tiling done in their house, and the guy quoted them a price. Like, wait, that's kind of expensive. It was just for the kitchen. They got a second quote. The guy gave them a quote exactly to the amount they gave us for the down payment on the car. And it wasn't just for the kitchen. It was a quote for the entire house. And it's just like the favor of the Lord has been on us. And it's been just a real quick, just upswelling. My wife was able to get a new job. She quit Walmart. Now she's working at an undisclosed location for a lot more money and more money to come. And it's just like where she's at, they are who they've been praying for. And so then I felt about my job. It's about time for me to leave. When it will be time for me to leave. And Monday, I will be putting in my 2 weeks notice. My regional manager came in. My daughter stays with me at work because we homeschool my daughter. I will not put my daughter in public school. That's just a me and God thing right there. It's my responsibility to teach and care for my kid. And hasn't had a problem in 2 years. And my daughter's been coming to work for 2 years. The everybody at that store loves her. My manager on down. Okay, she's well behaved. And something was telling me about 5 days ago, okay, get ready, you're about to leave. And I had peace about it because I saw God just opening up doors everywhere else. And the pillar of cloud was moving. And I was packing up and I was getting ready to go. So Friday, the regional manager comes in, and as he's leaving, he told my manager, he said, she can't be here. I could have you fired for that. She came to me in tears. She said, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I was like, sweetheart, it's okay. I'm putting in my 2 weeks right now. And she said, what? I said, it's all good. God's let me know that it's my time to go, and I don't hold any animosity. This is an open door I've been praying for. And man, I was just able to hug her. Her husband was right there. Right? He's a big old dude. And I looked at Derek and I said, hey, man, I said, do you mind if I hug your wife in front of you? I was just getting permission, man, just being respectful, because this woman has given me a chance at my job, man, when I needed it. It was, God gave me favor with this company. It's been a difficult job. I've got a chance to meet a lot of people. They're my family, but God's opening up the door for me to leave. And I'm leaving. I'm going to be focused primarily on homeschooling my daughter. I'm going to be doing some coding work. Paul Vartney has given me some insight on where to go for that. I'll be working on that. I'm also going to be starting doing training for coaching. Okay. I've been losing weight, doing carnivore. I want to come alongside people and help with that. But also, I just want to speak life into people's lives, people who have struggled with addictions and people who have struggled with just trauma, things like that. So I'll be able to do the coding certification plus the coaching. And also, I will be starting the podcast. This will open the door for me to do that as well. I've been putting it off. I've got an open door for that. And also working with a group dealing with porn addiction as well. So I've got a lot of things on my plate, and it's all coming together at once. And I'm excited. I'm excited for this podcast, the success that's going on. I bought a laptop from a guy at Walmart today, man. I told him about the podcast. He's going to be checking it out. I've been texting my buddy saying, hey, that podcast episode I told you about, we're doing it now. It'll be out soon. They're excited, man. So I just thank you for the fellowship of the brothers that I have here. I know I don't know all of you. You know, you see me acting goofy on Facebook. I'm a lot more than just memes and snide, goofy comments. Okay. I think God is with us, and God is waking us up to what we need to be focusing on and getting people alert to what's going on. And I just want to say thank you for sharing this time with me. I appreciate y'all. Love you.
Yeah, man, for sure. And I want to say something about your weight loss journey. I want to congratulate you too. I've been watching you go through that, and you it's been a huge success for you, man. I'm just really excited for you. That's one thing that I've been trying to preach to people, I guess you would say, is getting your diet in line. Even if you're not hitting the gym 2 or 3 times a week or whatever. But if you get your diet in line, it changes a lot with your body. And I think it's awesome what's going on with you right now, William. It's awesome to watch God work with you. And it's, as much joy as you feel for it, getting to watch it from on my end gives me just as much joy. It's really cool.
I love you guys.
Love you too, man. I love each and every one of you, and I got to meet Jim in Nashville when we had our meetup, and next time we do it, I hope more people can show up, because we had a good time. We got to we went down to Lower Broadway and met people. It's a touristy, destination where all the folks that come in to Nashville from out of town. So we met people from all over the country, and I was wearing a Bad Roman t-shirt. Darren was wearing a No King But Christ t-shirt, and it opened up some conversations, man. That's one thing I love about our apparel. When people see it, they kind of look at you, tilt their head a little bit. It's like, what is that all about? We were at a bar listening to some music, and this girl looked at me, she goes, "Do you believe in God?" And I looked down at my shirt, and she goes, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" I was like, "I am a Christian." She goes, "Me too." And then we got to talk about the podcast a little bit. That was awesome. It's funny how you can have conversations like that in a bar. Some of my most favorite conversations about politics and religion have been sitting at on a bar stool. I know that sounds crazy, but I've had some really interesting conversations with folks. But it's one thing that I love about the group that's involved with the Bad Roman is we're unashamed about our belief in no king but Christ. We're very bold in our view of no king but Christ. There's no hesitancy, and I think that the idea that we've started this project, it's now 3.5 years ago. The more it's grown, there's more people across the country and even across the world that are latching on to it. So they're having these conversations across the world about no king but Christ, and that gets me really excited. And it's not anything that I'm doing. It's just God using a stupid redneck from West Texas to get behind a microphone and spout awesome stuff, and it makes sense to some people, and that's awesome. God can filter out my ignorance and and make it sound the way it's supposed to. Also, I have a fantastic producer as well. Do y'all have anything you want to plug before I cut this off? Or
everybody should follow the Bad Roman on Twitter and Facebook. Go on to Facebook, see William's memes. Go on Twitter and give. It's the best place to give Craig a hard time for his beliefs. Talk smack to him on Twitter.
For sure. Yeah. I actually just recently took over the Twitter page. I had somebody else doing it, but he's just gotten so busy. So I've been taking over the Twitter thing.
There you go. If you're mad at Craig, go on Twitter and tell him.
Or you just email me. I get a lot of emails. Actually, I found a stash of emails that I didn't know existed. It's called forums. There's a forum section in our email. And I pulled it up one day to see what it was. I was like, oh my goodness. These people messaged me months ago, and I haven't responded to them. But I've been in contact with everybody. I try to make it a point to reach, at least respond back to folks who message us. Sometimes it takes me a while because I get busy with this and work and stuff, but I will get back to you.
Aaron, did you want to say anything else about what people should do if they want to know more about the medical side?
I mean, pretty much all I do on social media is educational type stuff. So, I mean, I can plug it if you don't mind. Probably the most as far as medical is concerned would be a group on Facebook called the Endocannabinoid System. And besides just a good collection of scientific literature and popular literature about the subject, I know there are at least a handful of the top scientists in the world that study cannabis and the endocannabinoid system are in the group. So, I mean, it's a pretty solid resource to have. The other groups are that I'm in are educational, but I don't know that they are necessarily just about medical. I mean, I do have an Instagram account. I won't actually plug the Instagram account, but I guess if people are interested, they can ask. And I started it when I started growing, and it's basically I just try to keep it like a day in the life of a medical cannabis grower. I basically just kind of go through everything I have to do to grow my medicine. So, sometimes in the year you see me growing plants, and sometimes in the year you see me drying plants and making hash and things like that. So it's a Heavy Ice RX, and it's a play on the pharmaceutical, the little RX thing on pharmaceutical. But in my head, it stood for resin extraction is the RX. So it's Heavy Ice RX on Instagram. And you'll see lots of cannabis plants and cats and things like that over there.
Cats. I like cats. I'm a big fan. All right, guys, I'm going to let y'all get out of here, and then we'll probably have to do this again, depending on the amount of pushback Craig gets. The more pushback I get, the more I want to talk about things, and I like to do it behind this microphone. All right, guys, love y'all, and we will do this again soon. Talk to y'all soon.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.